Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Megan Meier. Some of you may have heard it. It was in 2006. There was a young lady by the name of Megan Meier that had committed suicide. It was over something on the internet. She had been talking to somebody that was presumably a young man that had showed interest in her. What happened was this person that was supposedly this young guy, it seemed like he was enamored with her or what have you, and then he started saying, hurling these derogatory remarks or something, you're something like, you're better off not being alive or something. I don't remember the exact words, but something to that effect. And she ultimately wound up killing herself. So I want to talk about astrology and some natal placements, transits that may have been tied into this. Now, Megan Meier is a sun in Scorpio. She was born on November 6, 1992. I don't know her time of birth, so I improvised and did a solar sunrise chart. She was born in O'Fallon, Missouri. The date of the suicide, or is the confirmed death date, was October 17, 2006. She was only 13 years old at the time. Now, what happened was there was someone by the name of Lori Drew had created a fallacious online character by the name of Josh Evans. And what happened was this was a fictitious character, and it was a ploy basically to get information out of Megan Meier and to ultimately use it against her. It was some kind of vengeance tactic, lack of better words, because Lori Drew felt that Megan Meier had been gossiping about her own daughter, and this was like a form of vengeance and revenge on Lori Drew's part. Now, what I wanted to say is the first thing off a little bit about Megan Meier. According to Wikipedia, she had some attention deficit disorder diagnosed with it. She was also diagnosed with depression. Now, in the solar sunrise chart, I know, well, Mercury is in Sagittarius regardless of time of birth. She has Mercury in Sagittarius, and I'd say Mercury in a mutable sign. I think especially Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini can sometimes be an indicator of this. At least have it's not a definite indicator of this, but at least give a stronger propensity for some kind of attention deficit disorder, because it's the lack of focus and attention on something. And Saturn Saturn being on the third, the zodiac sign Capricorn being on the third house cusp right there by itself, sometimes this could give despondent thinking and some depression and thoughts and feeling melancholy. Remember, the third house is our thinking. It's the rational mind. And also, too, she also has Saturn in that third house in the solar sunrise chart as well, and that could add to some despondent thinking. The fact it's an Aquarius, it might have been over limitations in friendships and groups and acquaintances. There might also be, it might have been something that was really sporadic and erratic, considering we're talking about Aquarius. Now, a thing too is that it was stated that the medicine can actually increase a propensity for suicide or exacerbate that possibility if the person was already suicidal, especially, and she had been taking some medications. And at this time of her death, she had transit Neptune in that third house in the solar sunrise chart. Neptune can be about medicines. It can include prescription medication, and it might have impacted her rational thinking, being given that the transit was in the third house. Now, in her natal chart, she also has Neptune was conjunct her third house in depressive Capricorn. So this can be an indicator of deception, duplicity in communications, not by her, but because she was deceived online in thinking that this was a guy that was genuinely perhaps in love with her, or at least was strongly infatuated with her and liked her strongly. She also had Uranus conjunct Neptune in her natal chart, which is another indicator of possible deception through the internet, and being in Capricorn causing despondency and sadness in the second house of self-esteem. So this might have impacted her self-esteem and self-worth very strongly. In this chart, in the solar sunrise chart, she has a preponderance of planets on the bottom half of the chart, which indicates more introversion, more introspection, and the fact that she also has the majority of the planets on the left side of the chart. Somebody that was obviously, I believe, very self-reliant, very independent, somebody that wasn't going to really deal with any interference from anybody. I don't think she was exceptionally happy when her mother was trying to intervene and putting these perhaps maybe there was some stipulations on her online activity. She was obviously somebody that did not want to be controlled, but at the same time, I do realize and respect that a lot of young children, teenagers are that way, and they often don't want to go with what the mother is actually, or the parents are actually stating. Sometimes the inclination is to rebel and go against the grain, so to speak. Now, also in the chart, she had in the solar sunrise chart, she had Uranus in Pisces. Well, actually, what it was, she had transit Uranus and Pisces in that fourth house at the time, and this could be an indicator of internet deception, duplicity, which may have been tied into the end of life. She also had transit Neptune in Aquarius in that third house in the solar sunrise chart, which could be an indicator of duplicitous online communications at this time. And looking at the solar sunrise chart, she had Gemini on the cusp of the 8th house, and the ruler of the 8th house in the first house. Now, Gemini on the 8th house cusp can, if somebody, the death may be connected with some breathing issues. When she hung herself, obviously that cuts off the air and the breathing supply, basically. So having the ruler of the 8th house in the first house, it's not surprising that this happened early on in her life. Now, it's subjective. What constitutes the early childhood? First house governs early childhood, but this did happen when she was 13 years old, so that would at least be pretty close to the early childhood, I would say. So anyway, and another thing, she had Aquarius on the fourth house cusp at the end of life, that latter part of life, the end of life. Now, based on the solar sunrise chart I did in putting the sun at the same position as the ascendant, the fourth house cusp came to 22 degrees Aquarius. So basically, I did the chart for the sunrise time where the sun would be at the same position as the ascendant. Aquarius is at the fourth house cusp at 22 degrees, a critical degree, and that might have further accentuated something very adverse at the end of life. And Aquarius, of course, could be associated with computers, the internet, and things you may do online through social media and social networking. Of course, that puts the midheaven at 22 degrees Leo. And it's not, and obviously you have Leo, the sign associated with notoriety, attention, and recognition. You have it on the 10th house cusp of status and recognition. This was recognition she attained, unfortunately, in a very adverse way. It came out in a very large Leo way, but at that 22 degrees, it is a critical degree. The 22 degrees might be negative anyway for all zodiac signs, but especially in the fixed signs. And she had 22 degrees coming as far as the solar sunrise chart goes, 22 degrees Leo on the 10th house cusp. So also too, the ruler, going back to her fourth house cusp, she had the ruler of the fourth house in the third house, so it's not surprising the end of life was attributed to a neighbor. This person, Lori Drew, she lived like 4 houses down from where Megan Meier was residing at the time. Hold on a moment, people. She also had some transits in the chart, too, sadly, that were ominous. She had at the time, she had transit Pluto, making a conjunction to the North Node, or at least a long conjunction to her natal North Node in Sagittarius. When we have transits that involve the North Node, it could often be about issues one may have to confront or address. And Pluto is the planet associated with death. The death was something I see as rather reckless and foolhardy. It was something where it might have been flavored with self-righteous energy, basically stating, okay, I'm going to do this. Nobody's going to stop me. I don't care what anybody thinks, sadly. And at the same time, she also had transit Jupiter was conjunct her natal Pluto in Scorpio. So it is not, I mean, when I talk about, I mean, you people, I mean, you've heard some of my other videos. I've talked about Jupiter being rather paradoxical. It could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. Sometimes this can enlarge and expand issues with death. Her death, and being in Scorpio, I mean, it's not surprising this death occurred. It was a result of somebody being somewhat vindictive, vengeful. It was very diabolical. It was somebody pretending to be somebody else online. And she also had transit Mercury near the midpoint in Scorpio of her natal Sun and Pluto. Mercury can be, I mean, Mercury can rule breathing. When she died, she did. I mean, when you're hanging yourself, you're cutting off the air supply. And it fell between the two planets, between right near the midpoint of the Sun and Pluto. The Sun in astrology is about life. Pluto, sadly, is about death. This was sadly ending her life with some kind of, it was really like a strangulation. It was something when you're hanging, you're cutting off the breathing supply. Mercury can be connected with that. And another thing I noticed too is that in the solar sunrise chart, she had transit North Node in Pisces, very close proximity to her 5th house cusp. And when you're talking again, going back to the North Node in transit, it could manifest in issues that one may have to address and confront. And this was about confronting, sadly, some kind of deception, duplicity associated with some love, or a love that was fictitious or fallacious. Now, she didn't realize that at the time that she had hung herself, but she realized, she saw this as like a betrayal, basically, because at first, for like the first 5 weeks or whatever, this person acted like he was really enamored with her, and then this Josh Evans fictitious character acted like he was enamored with Megan Meier. Then all of a sudden he turns around, this fictional character says, okay, I don't like you, you're better off not being alive or whatever, and basically did a 180 on this person. So it was dealing with something confounding and confusing regarding this so-called love, and it wound up being some kind of deception in love. And what's ironic, sadly, and this is no knock on Megan Meier, but when you look at Scorpio energy, what's sad is that I look at this, and Scorpio energy can be really going beyond subterfuge and superficiality, and getting to the understanding character composition of others. And she had Pluto conjunct her Sun in Scorpio, which might have given more power to this. But she was sadly unable to detect the deception in this case. Now, I know astrology isn't everything. Some of this might have been because she was very young. When you're very young, you could be somewhat impressionable, somewhat gullible. But I think what it is, when you look at Pisces on the cusp of the 5th house, in Scorpio often has Pisces on the cusp of the 5th house in their solar or natal chart, and it could be an indicator that even though Scorpio usually is not one that's going to be manipulated, they have the tendency to be deceived for whatever reasons in the love department. So and that's, I think, was the case here. And her moon may have been in Pisces, depending on time of birth. If she was born anywhere between around midnight, 7:30, somewhere around there, her moon's in Pisces. But if it's after around 7:30 a.m., then of course it goes into Aries. So it wouldn't surprise me if her moon was actually in Pisces at this, oddly enough, at the solar sunrise chart. Her moon came to 29 degrees Pisces, and as many of you may know, that degree conjuncts the fixed star sheet in astrology, and that could often indicate suicidal tendencies. And the thing is, given that it's the moon, it could be one over something of a very sensitive and emotional nature. Now, another thing that I did notice, there was something where it's interesting that it said that, it was stated that she's had issues with self-esteem. Well, Sagittarius falls on the second house cusp in the solar sunrise chart, so you would think that could give actually luck, and it could be very fortuitous for self-esteem. But the problem is, I think, the fact that Neptune was in that second house in the solar sunrise chart, that could be a dissolving or dissipation of one's self-esteem. And also in the solar sunrise chart, the ruler of the 12th house falls in the second house, so that could be an indicator of limitations and restrictions with self-esteem, that there might be some sorrow in connection with that. So anyway, and she also had the moon. What I want to talk about too, there's an opposition she has in her chart too, where the moon is making an opposition to her Jupiter now, and that's based on the solar sunrise time, and this could give very exaggerated or distorted emotional reactions to things. So those are some things I wanted to get at as far as her chart goes, and indicators as to perhaps what was happening going through her mind during this time, as far as her committing the suicide. She also had some transits hitting the 12th house of endings at this time. The Sun was in her 12th house at the time of the suicide. We have transit Sun hitting the 12th house. That could suggest that really a hidden adversary may come to light. It could shine the light on a hidden adversary, so to speak. She wasn't alive long enough to uncover this, but this was something, in the near future. What was discovered was that that there was somebody that maybe came across, that was transit Sun and Libra in that 12th house. Somebody that might have come across as very amicable, charming, diplomatic, refined, was somebody that may have been unveiled as far as a hidden adversary goes, somebody that was pretending to be somebody neighborly and really wasn't. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.